This video is for Tuesday, March 30th for trigonometry. We're going to be reviewing some SAT topics as well as the quadratic formula. Okay, so you follow along as you watch me talk about it and write down on your page what I write down on the board. Okay, so here we go. Alright, so number one, I'm going to read it to you first. It says, a painter will paint n walls with the same size and shape in a building using a specific brand of paint. The painter's fee can be calculated by the expression NKLH, where N is the number of walls, K is a constant with units of dollars per square foot, L is the length of each wall in feet, and H is the height of each wall in feet. If the customer asks the painter to use a more expensive brand of paint, which factors in the expression would change? So think about it. You got N walls, and the wall is H feet high, L feet long, and then you've got the paint. So obviously the height, the length, and the number of walls isn't going to change. It's just the price that would change if you used a more expensive paint. So the answer to number one is C, because the number of units per square foot in terms of dollars is the part that would change there. So number one is C. Wherever the pin went. Okay, number two says, if 3r equals 18, what is the value of 6r plus 3? So they're giving us an equation, 3r equals 18. We're going to have to solve it for r first, then plug that back in and find the value of 6r plus 3. Okay, so I'm going to write that up here. Okay, so to start with, r equals 6, but I have to find 6r plus 3. So 6 times 6 plus 3. So 36 plus 3 is 39. So the answer to number 2 is D, 39. Okay, I'll move so you can see that. Alright, I'm going to erase those now and go to number 3. Okay, number 3 says, which of the following is equal to a to the 2/3 for all values of a? So if we have a to the 2/3 power, that really means I'm taking a and squaring it and then taking this cube root after the fact. So that actually equals a squared times, well, being raised to the 1/3 power, like this. So that actually means a squared, and then that's being raised to the 1/3 power, because our exponent properties tell us that when you have a power to a power, you would multiply those, and it would result back in what we had to start with, 2/3. Okay? Now, 1/3 as a fractional exponent is the same as if you had a cube root. So this equals a squared, and we're taking the cube root. Okay, so the answer to number 3 is D. Okay. All right, we're going to turn the page. All right, number 4, we have this big long paragraph to read. It says, the number of states that joined the United States between 1776 and 1849 is twice the number of states that joined between 1850 and 1900. Okay. If 30 states joined the United States between 1776 and 1849, so 30 states joined then, and then it says, and X states joined between 1850 and 1900, which of the following equations is true? So remember, they said the number of states that joined between 1776 and 1849, which is this 30, is going to be twice the amount that joined between 1850 and 1900. So our equation looks something like that, and the one that matches that of your choices is B. So number 4 is B. Alright, so I'm going to erase 3 and 4 now, and then on number 5, we're going to use proportions, because it says if 5 over x equals 15 over x plus 20, what's the value of x over 5? So as you're probably starting to notice, SAT questions are often multiple parts. So they are trying to trick you by having you quickly solve it for x, and you think, oh man, that's a choice for the answers, that must be it. But really, they're asking you a 2-part question. So you have to be very careful, take your time, make sure you read the whole question. Because number 5, we've got 5 over x equals 15 over x plus 20. But they want to know, what is x divided by 5? Okay. Alright, so to solve a proportion, if you remember, we're going to cross multiply. So we're going to cross multiply 5 times x plus 20. And then 15 times x. So I'm going to distribute this 5. Okay, so now I've got that. Now, the next move is going to be to subtract 5x on both sides. And now I have 10x equals 100. So we're going to divide by 10. Then x equals 10. Okay, now, I want you to take note that 10 is a possible choice for the answers here. But don't just circle 10, because they asked us, what is x divided by 5? So 10 divided by 5 is 2. The answer is actually 2, and you're going to circle C. Okay, so number 5 is C. Okay. So leave that there for a couple more seconds, and then we'll go to number 6. Okay. Now, last week we reviewed systems of equations. So number 6 is going to require us to use our systems of equations knowledge. Okay, so I'm going to write this up here. Okay, so before, when we reviewed systems of equations, we had to make sure that the coefficients in front of x or y were the same, or we could use substitution. Okay, well here, I'm going to make the x's have the same coefficients by doing the following. I'm going to multiply the top row by 3, because this number in the second equation has a 3 in front of the x. I'm going to multiply the second row by 2, because there's a 2 in front of the x on the top equation. Okay, and that will make them both be a 6 in front of the x. We're going to have for the first one, 6x minus 9y equals negative 42, and 6x minus 4y equals negative 12. Okay, so those are our 2 equations now, and as you can see, they both say 6x now. So we could subtract to cancel out the x's. When you subtract, you're going to have negative 5y equals negative 30. So next we're going to divide by negative 5, and we get y equals 6. Okay, so next we have to find x. So you can pick any equation you want to plug that back in to solve for x. I'm going to pick the original top equation. So 2x minus 3 times 6 equals negative 14. Okay, so 2x minus 18 equals negative 14. We got 2x equals 4, and you divide by 2, and we're left with x equals 2. Alright, so now it's important to take note of what the question was actually asking us. It says, if xy is the solution to the system of equations above, what is the value of x minus y? So we're going to take 2 minus 6 to get our answer. So So 2 minus 6 is negative 4. So the answer to number 6 is C, negative 4. So there we have something we reviewed last week that was an SAT question. And after you found x and y, you had to subtract. Okay? So when you're ready, you can turn the page. Now, the next problem is going to talk about slope-intercept form of a line, which we also discussed last week. Okay? So you got to remember that good old y equals mx plus b. Okay, so here we go. Number 8 says the line y equals kx plus 4. So I'm going to write that up here. Where k is a constant, is graphed in the xy plane. So k could be any number. When they say constant, they mean any number, like a 2 or negative 7. It's any number. Okay. So the line, if the line contains the point C, comma D. So now they're giving us a point on the line C, comma D, where C is not 0 and D is not 0. What is the slope of the line in terms of C and D? Well, if you remember back to last week when we were writing equations of lines and we had y equals mx plus b and we had to find b. They gave us the slope, they gave us the point. Okay, and you remember we plugged in the x and the y and we solved for b. Okay, well here they want us to actually try to solve for k in terms of c and d. So we're going to plug in c for x, d for y, and we're going to then solve the equation for x. Okay, so I know that's a lot to take in, but we're going to plug in d for y, c for x, and now our goal is to try to isolate k. We want to get k by itself. Okay, so I'm going to subtract 4. So we got d minus 4 equals kc. Okay, again, my goal is to solve for k, so I'm going to divide by c now. And I am left with d minus 4 divided by c equals k. Alright, so we're looking for the choice that looks the closest to that, and it's A. So the answer to number 8 is A. Okay, so that's all about using your knowledge of slope-intercept form and knowing where to plug in a point. Okay, so that's number 8. Now, we're going to talk about the quadratic formula, which is what your homework will be about today. So now I'm going to read to you what it says here on your notes about the quadratic formula. Okay, so it says, when you cannot factor a trinomial, so we also recently reviewed factoring, the only resort is to use the quadratic formula, which will always work for any trinomial. So if you're not the best at factoring and you can't figure out what multiplies to give you a certain number to add up to the middle term b, then you can always use the quadratic formula. It might take you a little longer, but it will always work. Okay, so the quadratic formula tells you the solutions, or the zeros, to any quadratic equation or trinomial equation. So if you think about it, quadratic equations, or trinomials, when you graph them, they make a parabola, so U-shape. And the solutions, or the zeros, or the roots, are the places where the parabola crosses the x-axis. So if this was the picture, the zeros would happen here and here. Those are also called solutions and roots. So the quadratic formula tells you those values where the parabola would cross the x-axis. Okay, so we're now going to talk about the formula itself. Okay, so for any trinomial, also known as a quadratic equation in this case because it's got the squared behind that term. Okay, the quadratic formula looks like this. Negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. Okay, now that 4 is always a 4, and that 2 is always a 2. But the values of a, b, and c change for every equation. Okay, so you're going to be given an equation. You'll have to plug in all the numbers for a, b, and c, and then we'll simplify. Okay, so we're going to try it on number 14. So I'm going to erase this now. All right, here we go. So our equation is 3x squared plus 12x plus 6 equals 0. Okay, so here A is 3, B is 12, C is 6. Okay, so we're going to have negative 12 because you start with the opposite of B, plus or minus, because there's going to be 2 zeros or 2 answers to our problem. Square root B squared, so 12 squared minus 4 times A, 3 times C, which is 6, and all of that's divided by 2 times A, so 2 times 3. Okay, so I'll let you finish writing that down, and then we're going to work on simplifying what's under the square root. Okay, so here we go. So 12 squared is 144. We're going to multiply 4, 3, and 6. So when you multiply 4, 3, and 6, you get 72. So minus 72 divided by 6. Okay, so that's step 1. Okay, step 2 is we're going to do 144 minus 72, which is 72. Okay, now most of the time you would be allowed to stop here. This is acceptable to most people. But as you can see, what I just wrote there is not one of the answer choices. So if you do this on the SAT, you can say, okay, I know this is the answer, but I don't see it there. So what you can do is compare what we have here to the answers and see which one equals this. Okay, or I can show you how to simplify this further. And we're going to do that by splitting up the square root here. Because there are perfect squares like 4, 9, 16, 25, 36. Perfect squares that will divide 72 and make that square root more simplified. So you want to pick the biggest perfect square possible that will divide your square root thing. So that'd be 36 because 72 is 36 times 2. Okay, so I'm going over here with it. So 72 is 36 times 2. Okay, so now I'm going to erase what I wrote over there so I got some more space. Okay, so the square root of 36 we know is 6. So now it's going to say, if that will erase, it's going to say negative 12 plus or minus 6 square root 2 divided by 6. Okay, and you're thinking, well, Miss Webb, that still doesn't match any of the choices. But you can now divide negative 12 by 6, which is negative 2. You can divide this 6 by 6, which is 1. So this is the simplified version, and that is one of the answer choices, which is A. So the answer to this one is A. Okay. So now, again, all that work is only necessary if you can simplify the part that's under the square root. Okay. A lot of times, you'll either have a perfect square under the square root in general, which I'm going to show you on your homework here in a second, or you'll just leave it as a number under the square root. Okay, so that concludes the lesson. Okay, so now we're going to switch to your homework, which is about the quadratic formula and using it on trinomials or quadratic equations. Okay, so you can either pause the video here and wait till you all have your worksheet, okay, which is what I would suggest, and then you can press play again and we'll watch. Well, you'll watch me. I'm doing it. You'll watch me do number 1 on your worksheet here. Okay, so here we go. Okay, now I want you to also notice how this quadratic equation here says equals 0. That's because we are solving for the zeros of the equation. Okay, so here in this case, a is 1, because there's no number here in front of x squared, so it's implied it's a 1. Okay, b is negative 14, c is 45. Alright, so here we go. We're going to go with the opposite of that, so 14 plus or minus the square root, negative 14 squared, minus 4 times 1 times 45. And all that's divided by 2 times 1. Okay? Alright, so negative 14 squared is 196. So now we're going to have, in fact, I'll write it up here, 14 plus or minus the square root of 196 minus, we're going to take 4 times 1 times 45. That's 180. And all that's divided by 2. Okay, so 196 minus 180 is 16. Okay, here, look at this, 16. 16 is one of those perfect square numbers I was talking about earlier because you can find the square root of 16. It's a nice whole number. The square root of 16 is 4. So we now have 14 plus or minus 4 divided by 2. So to get the final answers, we're going to do 14 plus 4 divided by 2. So I'm going to write that down here. We're also going to do 14 minus 4 divided by 2. And that's a funky 2, but we're going with it. Okay? Alright, so 14 plus 4 is 18. And 18 divided by 2 is 9. Okay, 14 minus 4 is 10. 10 divided by 2 is 5. So your two answers are 9 and 5. So that means if you were to graph this trinomial, it would cross the x-axis at x equals 9 and x equals 5. Okay, so that's how you're going to do most of the problems on this worksheet. You will get a decimal for one of the answers on number 2. And number 3 you can leave in square root form because it's going to be a little funky. Okay, so I'm going to leave the answer key with Mr. Cook and he can check it if you need him to. Alright, so that's all I've got. I hope it goes well for you, and I'll see you next class. Bye.